Should you be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver in 2022? I hate YouTubers that ramble on, so let's get right into it. In this video, I'm gonna give you 7 factors that you really have to consider when it comes to should you drive in 2022 or shouldn't you drive in 2022. Number 1, the pandemic. I feel like I have to start here because this is still ongoing, as we all know. It started with COVID, now we have the Delta variant, and then the newest one is the Omicron variant, which sounds more like a Pokemon, if anything. Who knows what's gonna happen in 2022 as the year goes on, but it's something to be aware of if, let's say, you do have any underlying health conditions, if anyone you know does as well, family, friends, roommates, etc., that the more you're around random people, the more you drive, the more likely you are to get COVID. It's just something to be aware of. Now, the current rules here in America, and this could be different from here in the States to other countries, you have to wear masks while driving. That's for you and the passengers. There can only be 3 people in the back. There cannot be a random person in the front. And in addition, there's no Uber pool or Lyft line, at least right now. Looking at things in both a positive and a negative way, looking at both sides of the pandemic, if you've never driven for Uber and Lyft before, driving Uber pool and Lyft line is the biggest nightmare. I mean, in case you don't know what it is, it's something that existed before the pandemic where you could basically carpool or share the same Uber or Lyft with another person that you don't know. Think of it almost like a mini bus or a mini shuttle. As the passenger, you would save money by doing this, but as a driver, you didn't really make that much more, and it was just a nightmare because you drop off one person, another person would be waiting a few stops to get dropped off. It was just a nightmare as a driver. So right now, at least at the exact time of this video, that does not exist, and that's a great time to start driving because you don't have to worry about that. Now, I will say, there has been talks about bringing Uber pool or Lyft line back. It's tough to say when it might come back, but it's something to be aware of. In addition, drivers made significantly more money in 2021 or last year as a result of the shortage. So you're talking about, a lot more bonuses, incentives, and so much more because Uber and Lyft was trying to get so many drivers back on the road because there was a lot of people requesting Ubers and Lyfts. In 2022, I feel like there's not as much of a shortage when it comes to drivers, but it's still something to be aware of that Uber and Lyft is still trying to bring a lot of drivers on the road. And as you can imagine, with both companies really trying to get back to normal, that means they give you more incentives, more bonuses, which makes this a great time to drive. Number 2, the employee contractor status. This is incredibly ongoing, something you really need to be aware of. And this is not just from continent to continent, but also country to country, and even here in America, state to state. And that is, are Uber and Lyft drivers independent contractors or employees? Now, here in California, Prop 22 passed, which kept Uber and Lyft drivers as independent contractors. There's now talk right now, at least the exact time of this video, that in Europe, they might make Uber and Lyft drivers as employees. There's pros and cons to both sides. In addition, things can get a lot more tricky, especially when you look at the fine print of, let's say, making drivers employees here in California versus making drivers employees in Europe. There are different rules and regulations for each policy change in each area as well. This is just a giant mess, and again, this could change a lot. It is something to be aware of, right? Because there's a lot of, like I said, pros and cons to being an independent contractor, and also a lot of pros and cons to being an employee, and that could vary if it's worth it to drive or not worth it to drive. Number 3, the number 1 factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. Now, let's be honest. The main reason why you're watching this video is because you want to know, how much money can I make as a driver? Whether it is for side income, a vacation, savings, whatever the case is. I've talked about this before in a bunch of other videos on my channel, so all my subscribers know what I'm about to say. The number 1 factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver is your location. On this picture, and I've looked at this picture a bunch of times, this is a survey Rideshare did. I know this is from years ago, but they do this every year. I like this picture the best because it's the most complete. But this survey shows if you have 2 drivers in 2 different areas who drive the exact same hours, the exact same way, etc., one driver will make significantly more or less than another driver just because of their location. This is super unfortunate because let's say you watch this entire video and you're like, you know what? I think I'm gonna drive. Like, I think this is a good thing for me. But then your location just isn't the best. Unfortunately, you might not make that much money at all. And again, it really depends. There's a lot of different factors that come into play with this. So I'm really scraping the surface. But overall, your location, in my opinion, is one of, if not the most important factor to determine, should I drive or shouldn't I drive? And this is unfortunately at no control to you. It's all based on your location. Number 4, personal versus rental. Now, what you might notice on this video is kind of like a step-by-step progression, which is why I suggest watching this entire video, just because there's a lot to unpack here. But as you can imagine, let's say at this point, you're like, okay, you know what, the pandemic, I'm okay with that, I understand. You understand the whole difference between being an independent contractor or employee. You're in a good location to drive. Now, if you think about it, you need a car, right? You can be driving for Uber and Lyft, so of course you need a vehicle. And it comes down to this. Should you use your own vehicle or should you rent one through Uber and Lyft? Now, there's a lot of factors when it comes to renting a car through Uber and Lyft. They look at your credit score, they look at a bunch of other factors, and that can change how much you're gonna spend. On average, I'd say look about $200 to $250 a week you might spend renting a car through Uber and Lyft. Now, there's pros and cons to both. But the biggest thing to me is this. If you don't have a car, when it comes to renting, it's not a bad idea to start. Because let's say you're like, hey, you know, I'm trying to make some side cash. I don't have a car. We've all been there where you're like, wait, I want to get a job and I want to, like, you know, start making money, but I needed a car to get to the job. But I need a job to get money for the car. At least with renting a vehicle, you can almost start off and you just start driving right away. Remember, though, you are going to be in the hole. What I mean by that is, let's say you want to do Uber and Lyft part-time. Well, let's say you're spending $200 a week to rent a car. You're already starting negative $200. So even if you make, let's say, $150 a week, you're technically still coming out negative $50. And you have to make $200 just to break even. And I will say, you can easily do that probably in a day, being honest. When I drove in Boston, I made on average about $25 an hour. I feel like 25 is a good amount if you have to look at all the given factors of Lyft and Uber, especially if you live in like a good city. 25 isn't that bad. So you look at 8 hours to break even, and then all the rest of that money you make during that week is all profit to you. Now, when it comes to having a personal vehicle, of course, you don't have to spend any extra money to get a rental, but remember, you are putting that depreciation on your car. The wear and tear, you're gonna have to get a lot more maintenance on it, etc., etc. Another thing to remember too, and a lot of dealerships are doing this now, is the fact that let's say if you go to resell your personal vehicle and you did drive for Uber and Lyft, one of the first questions they now ask you is, has this vehicle ever been used for any ride-sharing or taxi-like service such as Uber and Lyft? And unfortunately, they might give you less money for your car. And these are different things to weigh out. I actually know people who have a personal vehicle but still rented a second car through Uber and Lyft because they said, hey, I'm doing it full time. The $200 I'm gonna spend a week is well worth it, where I can drive as much as I want, I can put as many miles as I want on that car, and I'm not really affecting my own personal vehicle in terms of the depreciation, the wear and tear, etc., etc. There's a lot to consider on both sides, but this is something you do need to weigh out when it comes to being a driver because you inevitably need a car. Number 5, rideshare insurance. If you're planning on driving, like say you're all set to go, you got your vehicle ready, but you're not gonna get rideshare insurance, I might say, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't drive. The reason why, as you can imagine, just statistics, the longer you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. And the last thing you want to do is get into an accident, you go to your insurance company, and they say, hey, whoa, we didn't know you were driving for Uber and Lyft. We're not going to cover you for this accident. Now you have to hire a car accident lawyer, and you have to do all this research about, I wonder what the best commercial vehicle accident attorney is or whatever. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. Make sure you get rideshare insurance. Now, yes, I will say this. Uber and Lyft does have their own insurance policies. This varies state to state and maybe even country to country. They do have their own insurance policies to help cover you as a driver, but I'm going to be blunt, they're not good enough. They're not that good. Make sure if you do get insurance, and you should already have car insurance, by the way, I have to say that. You should already have car insurance. Make sure, though, that you talk to your auto insurance and say, hey, just letting you know, I'm now starting to drive for Lyft and Uber. Inevitably, the amount you're going to spend in insurance will probably go up, and understandably so, but it is well worth it compared to the worst case scenario of you getting into an accident, your insurance saying, hey, we didn't know you were driving, we're not going to cover you, you're now getting a car accident lawyer, and all this negative stuff. Just get rideshare insurance. It's one of the most important things you can get. Another thing I do want to mention on the topic of insurance is keep in mind there's a massive difference between driving Lyft and Uber part-time, like so you have like a 9-to-5 job, you're driving on the side, and driving for Uber and Lyft full-time. If you're driving full-time and you're in a place that you're an independent contractor, I talked about that before, you will probably have to get your own health insurance. And if you've never gotten your own health insurance, at least here in America, it's a nightmare. Now, if you're in another country, you don't have to worry about this at all. Probably one of the most negative aspects about here in America is the whole health insurance issue. But if you're here in America and you're planning on driving, especially full-time, and you're an independent contractor, you have to navigate the exciting part of getting your own health insurance, shopping for premiums, and looking at what's an HMO or PPO. Just keep in mind that insurance is a tricky thing. Regardless of where you are, make sure you look into rideshare insurance. But keep in mind, if you're driving full-time, especially here in the States, you will probably have to get your own health insurance as well. Number 6, the logistics. Now, I feel like so far in this video, I've talked a lot about the negative parts of driving. I'd much rather talk about all the things you really need to know when it comes to driving in terms of your vehicle, your employee or contractor status, the insurance aspects, all these different factors. And on this point, I want to talk about all the positive aspects of driving because these are things a lot of people don't know. And there's mainly 3 of them that I really want to mention. One is you don't need a quota. I know a lot of people who are like, hey, Mark, I want to drive, but I don't have to be required to drive 50 rides a month or 10 rides a week or whatever the case is. There's absolutely no quota, and this is awesome because let's say if one week you want to kill it and drive 50 hours or 60 hours or 70 hours or 80 hours that week, and then the next week you don't drive at all, that's okay. It's completely up to you. You can drive for as much or as little as you want, which makes it super easy with your schedule. The second thing, as we all know, is instantaneously flexible. What I mean by that is most people know you can drive whenever you want. However, I've had people hit me up saying, hey Mark, I want to drive, but my schedule is kind of random. I don't want to have to tell Uber or Lyft when I'm going to drive this week. And I'm like, no. You turn on the app whenever you want. Lyft and Uber doesn't really know when you're going to drive. You turn it on whenever you want, and you turn it off whenever you want. If let's say you're bored one day and you're like, you know what? I kind of feel like driving. You just turn on the app and you drive. Let's say it's a random Friday night and you're like, you know what? I think I'd rather go out tonight than driving. You just turn off the app whenever you want, and that's it. It is truly instantaneously flexible. Keep this in mind, though. I feel like there's a bit of an asterisk on that you're going to make the most amount of money during the peak hours. Friday and Saturday nights, as we all know, and morning and evening commutes. Those are the best time to drive. So I will say that although Uber and Lyft says, hey, you can drive whenever you want, which is true. They're not lying. You can really only make the big bucks during those peak hours. That is something to keep in mind. And the third thing I want to talk about when it comes to the logistics as a great aspect of driving is instant cash outs. This is one of, if not the best part about driving, is you can hit a button and instantly have that money in your bank account. I feel like there's no other job that I can really think of that you can instantly start working out of nowhere. You work for as long or as short as you want. You hit a button and now that money's immediately in your account. You can use it however you want. So let's say it's a Friday night, and I've done this a bunch of times. It's a Friday night and I'm like, you know what? I'm going out for a friend's birthday. I'm going to drive a little bit longer. I'll make $100, $200, hit a button, cash out, instantly have, let's say, a few $100 in my bank account, and now I can do whatever I want with it. Let's say there's a bill you have to pay and you're like, oh shoot, I gotta pay this bill. I have to pay $150 for whatever tomorrow. You just drive today, hit a button, boom, $150, you pay that bill, and you're good to go. This is, I think, one of the best parts about driving, especially when you combine all these aspects, that Lyft and Uber is a really good backup option. If you need quick side cash, if you need to pay a bill, if let's say you want to have money in your account for whatever reason, you could start driving at any point in time. Remember, there's no quota. You start driving, drive as long or short as you want, hit a button, and any money that you just made is now instantly in your bank account. Number 7, test the waters. Now, one classic line about life is that there's one way and only one way to get into a pool, and it's not just walking in, it's jumping in. When it comes to Uber and Lyft, it's the opposite. I always suggest to beginning drivers, test out the waters. Please, please, please start part-time. That's probably the most important thing. The reason why is, as you can imagine with all this stuff I just mentioned, your location, the vehicle situation, the employee status versus the contractor status, there are a lot of different factors that determine how much money you can make. In addition, it also depends on your schedule. Like I said, you can really only make the big bucks during the peak hours. Well, if you can't drive during the peak hours because of your job, well, you might not make as much money as you were hoping. This is why I always suggest start off and test out the waters. Drive for maybe 5 or 10 hours in a week. See if you like it. You might start driving and be like, you know what? I actually don't like driving as much as I thought I would. It's just not for me. You might start driving and be like, wow, you know what? I actually kind of like this. Maybe I can do this full time, right? There are so many different factors that determine if you're going to like it or not, how much money you can make or not. Like I mentioned before, when it comes to your location, and even still, even like say in one particular state, in Ohio or Florida, 2 different cities in Florida, one can make very, very low, which Rideshare has shown in their surveys that Florida is not the best state to drive. But in another city in Florida, you can make a lot of money, which is why I always suggest make sure you test out the waters. Another thing I'm going to say as a massive pro tip, sign up with both apps. I've met too many drivers who complain, being like, oh, you know, I just don't make that much money driving for Uber, but this is what I'm doing. I'm like, well, what about Lyft? And like, no, I'm not going to drive for Lyft. Make sure you sign up with both apps, because some weekends Uber might pay more, and other weekends Lyft might pay more. Even in the same night, sometimes Uber might be paying the most for a couple hours, and then it switches to Lyft. This is something that's constantly changing, and that's why you always want to test out the waters as much as possible in the beginning, and then determine, do I want to keep driving or not keep driving? And now, a bonus tip is to consider delivery driving. Now, I've already done a video about should you do Uber or Uber Eats, or Uber and Lyft, or Postmates, or DoorDash, or any of the other delivery apps. There's a lot of pros and cons to both. I have a video listed below in the description if you want to watch it of a full in-depth analysis of rideshare driving versus delivery driving. But this is something to consider, because I know a lot of people are like, hey Mark, you know, I want to do Uber and Lyft, but my car doesn't qualify. There are actually a lot of requirements for your car. Or they're like, hey, you know, I want to do Uber and Lyft, but I just don't know if I want to have random people in my car. I'm not that social. I'm more of an introvert. Well, hey, why not consider doing delivery driving? A lot of the benefits of Uber and Lyft also exist with delivery driving. You know, when it comes to being able to be flexible, you drive when you want. A lot of instant cash outs exist as well. And in some ways, being honest, delivery driving is better than rideshare driving. In other ways, it's worse, right? And it depends on each person. I know some people who hate Lyft and Uber and say, hey, I'm only doing delivery driving. I like it way more. I know other people who say, hey, I hate delivery driving. I love driving for Uber and Lyft. It depends on the person. And again, like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to testing the waters, it also depends on your location. In some locations, Uber Eats pays significantly more than Uber. In other locations, Uber pays more than Uber Eats. And this can also depend night to night. So you could even, like I said, sign up with everything. You could try out doing Uber Eats and Uber on, let's say, a Friday night. Figure out in your area, well, I think Uber Eats actually pays more on a Friday night, but Uber pays more on a Tuesday night. And you can kind of test everything out to figure out how you can make the most amount of money. Lastly, a second bonus tip. I feel like this is the only time in any of my videos where I've had 2 bonus tips, and that is get a dash cam. I promise you the 40 or 50 bucks or whatever it is you're gonna spend on a dash cam is well worth it. I mentioned before about getting, let's say, a car accident lawyer or a commercial vehicle accident attorney or whatever, all that technical jargon. And at the end of the day, like I said, the more that you're on the road, unfortunately, the more there's an increase for an accident to happen, whether it's your fault or not. And spending that money on a dash cam can save you hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, right? It all depends on the situation, of dollars by having the actual proof of what happened when that accident occurred. And this is not just for Uber and Lyft drivers, but for delivery drivers as well, or pretty much anybody who travels a lot. Like, I drive a lot. I'm constantly on the road, and having a dash cam is just a really safe idea. One, because like I said, if let's say anything happens with another vehicle, you have footage of it. But also two, and we've all seen these reports, we've probably all seen these videos that go viral, there's been a lot more, let's say, incidents of people attacking an Uber or Lyft driver. And for most dash cams, not only do they record the front of your vehicle, right, in terms of what's happening in front of you, but in the back as well, or in your car. That way, let's say if anything happens, if there's a major dispute between you and a passenger, and you're like, shoot, this passenger is going after me, this just happened, or whatever the case is, you now have actual evidence of what happened inside of your vehicle when that incident occurred. In general, having a dash cam is one of the best investments you can make as a driver.